So ordinarily, as I'm sure most of you know or may have figured out, I put effort and time into my sermons every single week. I think about what's the most valuable thing either in the parsha or what's going on around the world. How can I, at the end of the day, be a source of inspiration for us? Sometimes it's even for myself that I'm talking to. Usually I would say 90% it's to you. This week, in reflecting on what went on and occurred earlier in Israel, I realized that a normal, typical Devar Torah was not necessarily what needed to take place or what should be taking place. Rather, more of a conversation and a discussion. I'm going to put a cap on it to about 12 minutes and say that we can continue it over Nosh. But I wanted to just kind of throw out a few salient details, really big things, because some stuff happened in Israel that, well, it's unique. It's a historical moment. And frequently, I think when we live through history, we don't realize that that was a big deal. But earlier this week, that was a big deal. And as Jews, for some of you, we have a deep connection with Israel. I have family in Israel. I live there. For others, their connection is tenuous at best, and especially as Reform Jews, we may just not identify much with Israel at all. So as you read or gathered from the prayer that I chose as part of the readings for this evening, 4 months ago was a big election. Netanyahu won. He went into office with a bunch of right-wing human beings, we'll call them that, without my side commentary. Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir being the two biggest ones of repute, who some of you may have heard. Smotrich is really in the settler movement, and so is Ben Gvir. And when I say that these guys are right-wing, they really are right-wing conservative people who, at least in Ben Gvir's case, was so radicalized that the army wouldn't accept him as a soldier. And he wanted and has control of parts of the police force in Israel, over holy sites specifically, in Jerusalem, and he is a known pot stirrer. So that's always someone that you want to have in a position of leadership. You want to have pot stirrers in leadership. I'm being facetious, of course. And they have been myopically focused, not on economic disparities, not on the fact that this year alone, I think there have been 6 women who've been murdered by their husbands as a result of domestic violence, not on ensuring up the rights of LGBTQI youth, or dealing with the fallout of COVID, or shoring up and focusing on the fact that most of the GDP for the country comes from startup nation, meaning from the high-tech industry, from a very narrow percentage of the population who are highly educated, highly skilled, and yet that skill set and education is not accessible for other parts of the population, and they have not been addressing the fact that Hasidim are not joining the army the way that they should be, and are essentially becoming more and more separate, claiming that religious exemption. They've been focused on one thing: judicial reform, to the detriment of the society at large. For 3 months, the past 3 months, Israelis have been getting out and marching in the streets. And I will say, shocking as it is, that includes my aunt, who is your age, Harvey. See, she's a youngster, literally, your age. And my cousins, who are a little bit older than me, who are also out marching in these impromptu rallies. in hometowns, not just in Tel Aviv. And these marches have been growing, and nobody in the government seemed to care. Netanyahu certainly did not respond when he received letters, not just one, but multiple, from Jewish leaders in this country of all movements saying, please do not go down this path. Why are they going down this path? Well, the issue is judicial reform. The belief from people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich is that the Supreme Court has too much power. Well, okay, fine. There needs to be some reforms. Maybe. The court has, in some cases, made decisions like getting people to and enforcing the rule about exiting of the Gaza Strip. They have had members who have been on the Supreme Court who were Arab Israelis, because the way the Supreme Court is, people go on to the Supreme Court, is it's a committee who are looking at who's the best jurist of the time. You have lawyers, members of the Knesset, and members of the Supreme Court who all come together and make a decision who gets to sit on the court. There have been others who've decided that the court has made, that some of the rulings, that the court has issued have really, in fact, in many cases benefited the liberal or progressive movements in Israel, us, fellow Reform rabbis or Reform Jews. And the feeling that the far right has is that their rights are being trampled by the Supreme Court. So they want to reform how the judiciary proceeds. They decided to do so. They wanted to have a majority rule in the Knesset. The Knesset's 120 members, 61 people vote to and according to the thoughts in the far right, is that the majority will vote and overrule what the Knesset has decided. That's what they like to see. Majority rule, and the majority of those people have a theocracy in mind. Big problem, because their understanding of Judaism and of halakha is not in line with my understanding of Judaism and halakha. It comes from a point of time that's frozen several hundred years back, which would not allow me to be on the pulpit as a female rabbi, would not recognize us in the way that I think we should be as Reform Jews. Their understanding is that Jews they would trample the rights of Arab Israelis based on majority rule. So it's not as if and changing the judiciary, I think, would be devastating to the Jewish democratic state of Israel. That being said, I think, of course, work needs to happen. Things need to change. You can't have one side of the country feeling so strongly about things one way and the other side of the country feeling so strong about things in the other way. We know what that looked like in the 1850s in this country. But, and I say this with a big but, things happened this past weekend, or last weekend, that was dramatic and significant. So Gallant, who was the defense minister, he is a general, he's well respected, he's very good at what he does, said, we are at a point of clear and present danger for the state. What Netanyahu is attempting to do to the judiciary can and will harm the state of Israel existentially. He was subsequently fired at 3 a.m. in the morning, Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, or whatever, Sunday morning. People started marching in the streets. Sandig, the head of the Histadrut, that is a progressive labor union. It is the oldest labor union in the state of Israel in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Everybody was a member of the Histadrut at one point. Now, not so much, but they still get out and march, and there's, strikes over there, definitely more than in this country. Up until Motzei Shabbos, the head of the Histadrut was silent about what was going on in the government. When Netanyahu fired the defense minister, the head of the Histadrut was out protesting publicly and calling for a national strike, which then happened, shutting down the entire country. That's what brought Netanyahu to make what I would say is probably one of the most, I won't say most beautiful, but it was a beautiful speech that he delivered about brother and in Israel not fighting one another. And he took this wonderful example from the Book of Kings and of Solomon of the women dividing up the baby over the issue of the judiciary. And he decided to table the conversation until after the Passover break, after all of the national holidays, at the beginning of the summer session for the Knesset, meaning the conversation about what will happen to the judiciary is going to take place somewhere in the middle of May. That's what the Histadrut going on strike did. It put a pause in the conversation. The president of Israel, which functions in terms of ritually or ceremonially, has put together a way to both reform the judiciary, reform the Knesset, because we can't have majority rule, and deal with the issue that there is no constitution in the state of Israel. They don't have a constitution like we do. Yair Lapid, who is the head of the opposition party to Netanyahu, is very pessimistic and not sure that negotiations are viable. Netanyahu's numbers in the polls have plummeted to record low, and a poll was taken place that if there were to be an election held, say, Thursday, because that's when the poll was issued, Netanyahu's coalition would be down 10 seats, which is insane. It's the biggest loss of any particular coalition in such a short time. It's tremendously unstable. So I would love to continue the conversation. This, again, like I said, is more of an educational foray into what's going on in Israel. But I felt obligated to kind of take a moment and explain what's going on, because it's important. We're over our time, but are there any questions? Because I really want to be clear. I'm not trying to talk politics, because I don't think that it's fair for me to profess a particular viewpoint to you too much. But are there questions? I'm trying to be as factual as I can be. In the Zoom room, questions? Have I put you to sleep? Okay. Yes, David Dorfman.
The issue of the understanding that Israel is a parliamentary system without a written constitution. So from a historical perspective, is to also understand Great Britain, because Great Britain too does not have a constitution, and it's the idea of precedent and with stare decisis, and that's what's important and difficult sometimes for an American to understand, because so much of our jurisprudence is based on.
Right. So the jurisprudence in Israel is based on British common law, where there is no constitution. So the judges use some sort of a combination of legal precedents based on the crown, as it were, and Jewish law to come up with many of their decisions. So it is a different process. And because there's a lack of constitution, it's very difficult. It's like comparing an apple to an orange, which I know is what you're struggling with.
And what I'm trying to emphasize is that's what's hard for me to understand, I think, in terms of the significance that the Supreme Court of Israel has so differently from the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Because the U.S. Supreme Court, it's done.
Right.
Without having to amend the Constitution, in case of Israel does not exist. So that power is for them, for the legislative branch to then outvote the decision of the Supreme Court is turning everything upside down.
Right. So you're correct that if the Supreme Court's decisions are overruled by the Knesset, it flips everything. It would change how the whole government functions for the worst.
And it can become, as you mentioned before, autocratic state.
That's the fear. And Craig asked in the chat room, well, what's going to happen in May? Won't this all happen again? That's the fear right now. That when you look at like people who study Israeli government, that's what they're all afraid of. That all we did is put the pause button. All right. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to I've gone on more on this topic than I intended to, but I would be delighted to continue the conversation. And if you have questions about it, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to discuss it further.